So this isn't going to be my most exciting or light-hearted or fun video, but it's so important, so please watch, please share if you have rodents as pets. And I wanted to talk about quality of life and when it's the right time to say goodbye. It's such a hard thing to think about and know when to do, but it's so important to consider for our pets. Especially with pets like rats and mice, because they are a prey species. They're so good at hiding pain and suffering and how they're actually feeling. It's one of the reasons they're so prolific and good at surviving in the wild. They will literally hold on until the very last point through so much pain and suffering, and it's our job as their caretakers to make sure they're not suffering too much, and sometimes that does mean taking them to the vets to be put to sleep instead. I've had more rats put to sleep than I've had just pass away naturally, because they will just cling on until the very end and be in so much pain and discomfort, and it's not fair for them to be sat like that for so long when we have other options. A really helpful saying that you might have seen going around the animal community before is rather a day too soon than a day too late, and that's really important to keep in mind. Some people are very anti-euthanasia. Even just yesterday on my videos, I'm still getting comments, especially on videos that have gone a bit more viral, of me saying goodbye to my rat Crumble on YouTube and TikTok. I'm still getting really nasty comments calling me a murderer, saying that I can't have loved him that much if I'm just willing to just take him to the vets and kill him, and other comments saying that he looked completely fine and there was no reason for me to have him put to sleep. Of course he's gonna look fine in a 2-minute video where I'm just showing his best parts, his best moments, and not the rest of the day where he was really suffering. I'm not going to put that into a compilation video that I want to look back on when I miss him. So these comments they don't really get to me too much, but when it's continuous it is a bit ridiculous. Now, you might not share your animals online in the way that I do, but you might receive similar comments from friends and family. Only you can make that decision and know when it's the right choice and when they've had enough, because you're the one that spends all of their time with them. But if they are suffering, whether it's pain, injury, illness, and there's nothing that can be done about this, it is really important not to just leave them like this. And even if you can't afford the treatment, I know it is a very sensitive subject, but even just making sure you're having them put to sleep so they're not suffering, reach out to your vets, ask if they do a payment plan, or even if you have to surrender them to a rescue or a vet, just make sure they're not sat there and suffering. That's the kindest thing to do. So it is a decision that only you can make about the animal that's in front of you. However, it can be really helpful to have a second opinion from a vet or a friend about their current quality of life, because sometimes our judgment can be clouded by love and how much we want them around, and it can be quite tricky. So that can help. There is also quality of life calculators online where you put in your pet's details, and we'll look at those in a second. Before we do that though, I thought it might be helpful to look at some case studies of my own pets that had varying different life-altering illnesses and how I knew it was the right time to let them go. So the first one is Crumble. This one was hard for me. It's still hard for me because he was my heart rat, and I think especially when you have a closer bond with a pet, selfishly you want them to be around as long as possible, so it does make making this decision a little bit harder than usual, and it was very difficult. But because he did have such a big personality, it was a lot more obvious when he wasn't himself anymore. Maybe not so much to others, but to me it definitely was. So he was 2 years and 6 months old. He was already pretty old at that point, and he was in active heart failure, kidney failure. He had been on medication for these for the past 6 months of his life, and they'd been working to a certain point, but they got to a point where they just weren't working anymore. It was too severe, and he lost the function of his back legs, and this meant he couldn't do any of the things he enjoyed anymore without my assistance. And even then he wasn't really enjoying anything, so all of his favourite things were very active things. Chasing a cat wand, going into his ball pit of packing peanuts. He couldn't do any of these things anymore, and he just was not really enjoying himself. Towards the very end, the last couple of days, he wasn't able to reach the water bowl or the water bottle without me lifting him up, and he also needed to have his teeth bared by the vet every couple of weeks or so because they were kind of misaligned and growing into the side of his cheek, and that was coming up on needing to be done again. But that put a lot of stress on his heart and his body to have all of this done, and I just didn't want him to have to go through that again. So that was coming up on needing done, and he was just done in himself. He was tired, he was pretty much just sitting in one spot all day, so he didn't really have much of a quality of life left anymore. He couldn't really do anything, so I had to let him go. Oftentimes for the rat or mouse that's in this condition, they have lost the function of their back legs, often due to other issues like kidney issues that can be quite uncomfortable. A lot of people will say, well, you wouldn't euthanize a person in this condition, and try not to anthropomorphize them too much because rats can't communicate and tell us how they feel and what they prefer and what decisions they'd like you to make about them. We have to make them ourselves, so we have to go off the medical and clinical signs, which are usually not good, and also their behaviours, what behaviours they're supposed to express and what behaviours they're currently expressing, which often is not very many of the natural behaviours they should be expressing. So keep all of that in mind. Try not to humanise them too much because they're not people, they can't tell you how they feel, and oftentimes they're not feeling great. So case number 2 is one of my female mice I had, one of my first female mice, Pebble, and this one is rough because it is more based around pain than an old age issue that was going to come to an end soon anyway. This one was very tricky to witness, and it was months and months of struggling to try and get a conclusion and just having to kind of give up at the end because it was just too much. So she had these really itchy, flaky patches of skin. I think it started on her face, near her cheeks. Then that went away, the hair started to grow back a bit, and then it started on her abdomen and her back. It would come and go in these patches, and it was so itchy. So we tried a parasite treatment for mites at first. That didn't work. Took her to the vets. I think they did a skin scraping and looked at that, and there wasn't any parasites. We tried a host of different medications, creams, all sorts, but nothing was really working. So these patches were very itchy, and she would scratch them and make them bleed and open wounds, and this was incredibly painful for her. So she was on like the strongest pain medications that a mouse can have, and even that was not helping. So it got to a point towards the end, she had this big one on her stomach that she was just reopening and re-scratching. And mice have a really bad habit of self-mutilating even after the issue is cleared up. Once they start to itch and bite and scratch, they find it very hard to stop sometimes. So even on the strongest medications, she was just constantly tearing this wound up and squeaking and screaming in pain. So I couldn't leave her like that. She was in so much pain and discomfort that I just had to take her into the vets, and nothing was working. We tried pretty much all of the treatments. I think she just needed time, but she wasn't giving herself that time to heal and leave it alone. Nothing was working, so it wasn't fair for her to be in this much pain and discomfort where she was causing herself to squeak. So that was why she had to be put to sleep. You might often find yourself in cases like this afterwards thinking, I wish I tried this, or researching and thinking, oh, I think it was actually this and this could have worked. But you only have a certain window of time to try things, and you've already tried other things at that point and nothing's really working. It's not sometimes fair on that rat or mouse to be sat in that much pain for something to hopefully maybe work. So even if they are on the younger end, sometimes it is kind of to just let them go peacefully and not be in pain any longer. So the final case study is my rat Humbug, and he's the only rat I've had with an external tumour. Because I keep male rats, it doesn't happen too often. I'm not going to jinx myself right now, but I've not had any other rats that have had external tumours. So this one I think I found the most difficult because he was still very much himself and he wasn't in pain yet. So his tumour appeared just before his 2nd birthday, and I personally, when it comes to rats and mice, if they have a tumour appear close to 2 or just over 2, I personally choose not to operate because I would much rather they spend the rest of their life, whether it's weeks or months, not having to recover or be uncomfortable. So I chose not to operate, and it was fairly slow growing. Towards the end it did pick up pretty quickly, but he lived another 3 months past his 2nd birthday. So the tumour was in his armpit, not sure which side, and towards the end it was getting pretty big, to the point where it was going to start to affect his use of this arm. He wouldn't be able to grip food or clean himself, and that would then reduce his quality of life. So that was one thing to consider. It was also getting pretty big to the point it was getting pretty heavy, and he was always a very, very active rat. But I did see him a couple of times climbing the cage and slipping and falling, so that gave me a hint that it was starting to be time. And also the hair around the tumour, because the skin was stretching, the hair was starting to thin, so that to me was a hint that it was maybe getting close, or gonna start to get close to maybe bursting the skin, which is incredibly painful for them. A lot of people leave tumours in rats and mice a bit too late. This isn't me being mean, it's just a fact that a lot of people don't really know the signs of when it's too big and they start to get black and ugly and burst the skin, and that is incredibly painful for them. So please, if you see any signs of the skin getting quite tight or discolouring or going black, that means it's going to burst pretty soon, so please don't leave it that long. It's so painful. So I wasn't prepared to allow it to get to that point. As much as I loved him and as much as I still wanted him around, I gave him a good last couple of days and then I said goodbye. So as I've said many times in this video, when you choose to let your rodents go is an incredibly personal decision and only one that you and your vets can make. I just wish sometimes they would just go peacefully in their sleep, but unfortunately that rarely ever happens. And I do find myself at the vets with them quite often because they will just hold on until the very end. And there's a lot of rats and mice I had when I first started owning them that, looking back, I don't think I would have left it as long as I did, because I was relatively new to this and I was very attached to them and I found it quite hard. So I don't think I'd let them drag it on as long as I did back then. I think now I'm much better at knowing when to make that decision, but it does take a bit of practice and a bit of asking people you trust what they think as well. So let's have a look at this quality of life calculator. I'll link this below just in case you need some clarity to fill this out about your pets. But it's aimed at pets like cats and dogs, but we can use it also to think about our small pets' quality of life. So let's use a rat like Crumble as an example that's a bit older. He's got kidney failure and has started to, or has already, lost the use of his back legs. So for each variable there is an assigned value of 10 points with an example for scores of 1, 5 and 10 as guidance. Use your judgment to decide how your pet scores. For example, eating and drinking. If your pet only eats treats, you may assign a value of 2 or 3, higher than 1 which is not eating at all, but less than 5 which is eating slightly less of their regular food than normal. So for mobility, your pet cannot walk or stand without assistance. Your pet can move around as long as he or she has had their pain medication. They can do about half the activities they did when they were healthier, or they can get about half the distance on a walk, or like free roam for rats and mice. I would say this one towards the end for Crumble was a 2. He could still kind of drag himself around, but not very well. And he also couldn't do any of his favourite activities like pea fishing, things like that, which would be 10 points of a fully active pet that can do all of their activities. He was definitely not that. Pain, your pet seems painful, whining, crying, not willing to move. Rats and mice don't make much noise when they are in pain, but you can use the grimace scale for rats and mice. If they're puffed up, hunched over, that indicates they are in pain, even whilst taking medication. Or 5 points, your pet is on pain medication and they are helping at least 75% of the time. I would say 3 maybe. Uncertainty and understanding, factors that affect you. 1 point, your pet has a diagnosis that cannot be predicted. You may not understand the diagnosis, or the problem may be prone to sudden catastrophic events. Your pet has a medical condition that can change over time, is currently stable, and you're able to monitor this and make adjustments when necessary. So I'd say because his medication had started to not work and the end was kind of nearing anyway, I would say maybe 2 points for this. Respiration or breathing. This one's pretty important when it comes to rats and mice because they are so prone to having respiratory infections, and if something else is stressing them or making them feel unwell, often they can get issues with their breathing. So definitely consider this also when it comes to your rats and mice. If they're having a hard time breathing consistently all day, every day, it's not very fair on them. So, 1 point, your pet has severe episodes of difficulty breathing, coughing, open mouth breathing. Yeah, that's definitely an emergency. Not eating or drinking in an effort to breathe. Your pet has occasional bouts of coughing, wheezing, or exercise intolerance. I would definitely say that he was exercise intolerant at that point because he would get tired very quickly, so 5 points. Neatness or hygiene. Your pet spends time laying in their own urine and feces. They may be unable to control their elimination or be unable to move after elimination. Yes. Oh, your pet may have an external tumour or mass that is bleeding. Foul smelling, infected, you're unable to keep it clean or bandaged, or pressure sores from lying down. Yeah, not good. So I'd say a 2 or 3 for Crumble at this point because he wasn't able to move very much. I was having to kind of wipe him a little bit, so not very good at that point. I'd say 2, 3. Eating and drinking. 1 point is your pet is refusing food and water. They may be vomiting or having diarrhea. Rats can't vomit, but diarrhea, things like that are not a good sign. Or 5 points, your pet is eating more slowly and not as interested in food as they used to be. I would give this a 2 because he was still eating treats and wet food and McDonald's the last couple of days of his life, but definitely not interested in his usual mix. There's also a section about you as the owner, which is interesting. So 1 point is you're constantly worried about your pet. You may not understand what has happened to them. You feel overwhelmed and stressed trying to provide for their needs. That was definitely me towards the end, so we'll give that a 1. And then social ability. This one is so important because although older rats might choose to spend a bit more time away from other rats or mice, if we're talking about mice, it's still really important they can have that social interaction, and if the others are picking on them or others have passed away and they're too unwell to go through intros, that's not a good quality of life. So your pet does not spend time with the family. They might hide, become irritable or snippy if bothered. Or 5 points, your pet spends at least half the time with the family. So I'd say for a rat that doesn't have the use of their back legs, that's stuck on the base of the floor, they can't go up and choose to be with the others in the hammocks and things whenever they want to, so I'd give that a 2, I think. So that gives a total of about 19 points. A score of 80 is a happy, healthy pet. A score of 8 is a pet that is suffering. A low score on any of the measures may be a reason to consider euthanasia. So although 19 is not 8, it's not lower than 8, it's still not good when you read back all those sections and really take into consideration. It just gives you something to think about because 19 is still pretty far away from being a happy, healthy pet. So this can be really helpful just to go through the different sections and give you different aspects to think about when it comes to rats and mice and how they might not have a good quality of life with their pain or illness or injury. But yeah, I'm not going to say I hope you enjoyed this video because it's not a very nice one, but I hope it was helpful. And if you're watching this because you currently have a rat or mouse or other rodent, you're considering their quality of life, then I hope you're okay. I hope you're going to be okay. Just know you're being very selfless and making the right decision by them just to make sure they're not suffering anymore. So I hope this gave you something to think about. Don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you in my next video, which hopefully will be a lot happier than this, but I thought this was super important. So I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!